streaming. And I think we are okay. There we are. Good. We have a control to turn the latency down, so it's less of a lag. All right. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Welcome to you all. Welcome to everyone watching online. We'll continue our satsang. I want to apologize. Last week's satsang was cancelled at the last moment. Some minor health issues. Anyway, I'm fine. Nothing much. So we'll continue today. And what I'll try to do is to take the new questions first and then go on to questions left over from last week. I'm not sure if there will be able to get into that much, but as much as we can. And as always, we'll alternate between questions from our online students and questions from our local students. So we'll alternate. We'll start online. Just double check all of this stuff. I don't know what. Hey. Let me just check one setting here. Okay. Who knows? I'm sure it's fine. Usually, everything looks good except it's not giving any analytics, which is probably, there we go. Okay. It just took a long time for that to come up. We're absolutely fine. I'm sorry for the interruption. We'll start with our questions. By the way, when you send me a question online, it's really helpful if you put in the subject line, Satsang question. And the reason it's helpful is that Google helps me by putting it directly in the right inbox. If you don't put that in the subject line, I have to go looking for your questions. And I sometimes miss them. Anyway, so please put Satsang question in your subject line. Let's begin here. And this is a question from Eduardo, who lives in Dublin. Eduardo asks, he's watched my video about the world being an illusion. I think the title was, if the world is just an illusion, why does it seem so real? And in that video, I introduced the important Advaita Vedanta teaching about mithya, this intermediate level of reality. And Eduardo asks he says, I've never heard the word mithya before. What is the relationship between mithya and maya? That question about mithya and maya is not an uncommon question, but if you haven't heard the word mithya before, you're missing out on some of the fundamentals of Advaita Vedanta. On my YouTube channel is a series, I think, of 6 videos called Introduction to Vedanta. That's really, really a good place to begin. And by watching that, then you'll understand everything else, including what is mithya. I just said it's an intermediate level of reality, and the way we generally explain that is this pot has an intermediate level of reality, and that it exists because of clay. If there were no clay, this pot wouldn't exist. So the clay is more real than the pot. Pot is less real than the clay, but this pot is a lot more real than this one. You get my point? That's why we call it an intermediate level of reality. Dependent reality is a simple way to do it. So mithya is sorry to use these fancy philosophical terms, mithya is an ontological term. It's a term that describes an order of reality. We can speak of an absolute reality, Brahman. We can speak of an intermediate reality, the apparent world, which is mithya. And we can speak of an unreality, like the pot in my hand, or a pot you just imagine in your mind. Then, so that's, for Eduardo, that's a simple understanding of mithya. To understand it better, please watch those videos, Introduction to Vedanta. Other videos also, we'll discuss it. Then he asks, what is the difference between mithya and maya? This is a question that's asked quite a bit. And these words are really apples and oranges, so to speak. Mithya describes a level of reality. Maya describes a creative capacity wielded by Ishvara to create the universe. Maya is a shakti, it is a power. It's a power that's essential for creation. Many people misunderstand these terms. So Maya gets dumbed down, so to speak, to illusion or something like that. And mithya gets dumbed down to false. Well, these words are commonly used, but they will really mislead you. So this Vedantic vocabulary is crucial to understand properly. And to understand it properly, the simple way is watch that Introduction to Vedanta. Also, let me just mention in passing, some time ago I added to our teachings page a glossary of commonly used Vedantic terms. It's quite extensive. It's produced by a fellow student who attended the course taught by Swami Tadatmananda. It's very well done glossary of Vedantic terminologies with definitions as used by my guru and his disciples. So if you have any question about these terms, it's right at the top of the teachings page. You can't miss it. Go to the teachings page on our website, and it's the first entry you will find. Then, next question is from Hari, who lives in Bangalore. His question is, what exactly is akhandakara vritti? It's a very sophisticated expression, akhandakara vritti. Vritti means a thought, a mental event. Here it's a mental event whose akara, whose form is akhanda, unlimited, vast. And it's a technical word of describing the thought that arises in your mind when you become enlightened. That's really all it is, when you become enlightened. And here's the point. In order to destroy ignorance, and this is a very technical kind of analysis of how we gain knowledge according to Advaita Vedanta. It says, according to Advaita Vedanta, if you don't know the pot that you can't see, in order to gain knowledge of this pot, you require a pot vritti. So in your mind right now is a pot vritti, and that vritti, that thought in the form of a pot, destroys ignorance about a pot. Now you know there's a pot. Previously you didn't know there was a pot, but when that pot vritti arises in your mind, the pot vritti destroys ignorance about the pot. In the same way, if you don't know Sanskrit language or some aspect of Sanskrit language, you, by the way, complicated, you need lots of vrittis to understand Sanskrit properly, lots and lots and lots. Each one of those vrittis will destroy a certain aspect of your ignorance about Sanskrit. So this is the basic, I call it a model of how we gain knowledge. And that is You've all heard the Vedantic expression, veil of ignorance. So this expression refers to the fact that ignorance is like this cloth which obscures an object, and knowledge is that which destroys ignorance, meaning removing the veil of ignorance. Now it is said that just as this pot can be covered by cloth, your true nature is obscured by the so-called veil of ignorance. To gain knowledge of this pot, you need knowledge, to remove the veil covering this pot, you require knowledge, you require a vritti in the form of the pot. Make sense? I'll do that again because this is the final part. In order to remove the covering obscuring this object, you need a vritti in the form of the pot. The vritti in the form of the pot destroys the covering and reveals. The covering means ignorance, removes ignorance and reveals the object. The metaphor goes that Atma, your true nature, is also obscured by that veil of ignorance. To remove ignorance of a pot, you need a pot vritti, a vritti in the form of a pot. To remove ignorance about Atma, you require a vritti in the form of Atma. But Atma has no form. No problem. You require a vritti that has no form. Who says vrittis have to have forms? Definitely a pot has a form. So I gave an example earlier today. Justice. Justice doesn't have a form. It's a concept. It's a principle. You have no problem understanding what is justice. It's a formless principle. In the same way, to gain knowledge of Atma, which is formless, you need a vritti in the form of Atma, means a vritti that fully represents the nature of Atma. Atma has no form, so necessarily the vritti that reveals the nature of Atma will also have no form. Therefore, it's called akhandakara, a limitless vritti, a vritti that has no form, a vritti that is true to the nature of Atma. So that's an answer to this fairly technical question about akhandakara vritti. We'll take one more here. This is from Sandra. Sandra, or I guess in American English, Sandra. Sandra lives in Amsterdam. I'm not sure how they would pronounce the name. She says, I would like to learn and more know about these teachings and ancient scriptures. I don't follow a particular teaching, but I'm open to whatever helps on my journey. Where should I start? Which book? Which version? Oh, you look on Amazon.com for books. My gosh, which book? Yeah, and I don't mean to be engaged in any kind of self-promotion, but I highly recommend go to our website. And there is a syllabus of teachings on the website. Syllabus means you begin with the introductory works and work your way up. Some of them are videos, some of them are texts, some of them are audios, but you can get lost in the sea of literature out there. And sadly, there's lots of defective works out there, which they'll add to your confusion. Already you have enough confusion, you don't need to add to it. And if you just go looking for books, that can happen. So I highly recommend, again, not to promote myself in any way, but just in a very practical. Do we have any questions here? We'll need the microphone in back.
Namaste, Swamiji. Regarding your talk on Buddhism, in 2016, I had the privilege of going to China with 10 Buddhist scholars. I tagged along as a Vedantan. But one of them was a well-known translator of Zen texts from between a Japanese text like Dogen, who went to China in the 12th century and so on. And he's well known for his translations. Anyway, he changed suddenly from, his name was Tanahashi, he changed from calling Shunyavada nothingness to boundlessness. And it was a recent change. It caused a bit of a stir in the Buddhist community because they liked the Shunyavada being nothingness, but he changed that. And I also noticed the Dalai Lama, and I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but he had a series on neuroscience and consciousness, and he also started, I think, intimating about ultimate reality. And the reason I'm bringing it up is I'm wondering if today the thinking between Buddhism and Vedanta those gaps are being bridged
Okay.
without the benefit of the Shrutis.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay. So, this teacher has redefined shunya. Instead of meaning nothingness, it now means, according to him, it means, what do you say, boundless. So the term shunyavada goes back to scholarly texts, Mahayana's texts, going back, I think, to around the 6th century. I think is the date of Nagarjuna, who's the most famous. For the Mahayana Buddhism, Nagarjuna is like our Shankara. So we have Shankara as the central personage. They have Nagarjuna as their central personage. And I've studied his works. And shunya means shunya. Which is why when the teacher, you said, redefined it as boundaryless or boundlessness, there was a lot of objections because he's going contrary to what Shunyavada actually teaches, which means he's giving you his own modern version. He's giving you his own interpretation. And you can interpret anything, you can interpret what you want, but he's broken with their tradition, so a lot of people aren't going to be very, very happy with that. What I find more interesting is why would he do that? You know, I'm a teacher, so when a teacher does something unusual, I ask, why would they do that? And obviously, he figured out that the conventional meaning of shunya wasn't working very well. So it looks to me like he is admitting the shortcomings of his own Mahayana tradition and trying to fix up its shortcomings. And boundarylessness comes really close to Advaita Vedanta. That's not what Buddha taught. That's not what Nagarjuna taught. That's what this particular teacher taught, perhaps recognizing the defects in what Buddha taught and what Nagarjuna taught. Any follow-up for that?
He's a translator, primarily,
right.
And his, unrelated, but his wife is a Sanskrit scholar, so
right.
And
then they both knew
yeah.
what Nagarjuna taught, and that's
right.
why he knew he was, I won't say mistranslating, but putting an intentional spin on those teachings.
Right, and he was on the tour, so I was able to talk to him personally. But there's also Swami Sarvapriyananda, who is in New York, and he's from Ramakrishna Mission, and he also studies Buddhism a lot. And he said that Nagarjuna's teachings, if you really look at them, they're sort of two sides of the same coin. One is, what Nagarjuna is saying and what Shankara is saying are two sides of the same coin. You don't think
So what Swami Sarvapriyananda does is he addresses his audience, as your teacher was addressing the audience. So what you try to do is teach something helpful. Swami Sarvapriyananda is not a Buddhist, and like me, he has studied a little bit. I may have studied a little more, but it doesn't make a big difference. The job of a teacher is to teach who's in front of you. If I were teaching Buddhists, I would probably have to put a spin on Shunyavada also, because if I just say it's mere nothingness, it's not a very palatable idea. So every teacher will adapt what they teach for the audience in front of them, even if that means putting a spin on what they're teaching. Fortunately, I don't have to do that because I teach students of Advaita Vedanta, so I don't put spin. Actually, if I put a spin on, it's a little spin of modern science. I try to reconcile gaps between this ancient worldview and the modern worldview. I won't say it's putting a spin on because I'm not going against any Vedantic teachings, but I most certainly am adapting the teachings for the audience, as any teacher would. So I would suggest that both your teacher that you traveled with in Sarvapriyananda is putting an intentional spin on the language to meet the needs of an audience. Nagarjuna would be rolling over in his grave. Okay, another question here. Raise your hand. Nothing right now? Okay, we'll return to some online questions. This question from Jean-Maurice Duval, lives in Cleveland, Jean-Maurice. I don't understand why scripture, and this is actually a reference to our Uddhava Gita class, in which Lord Brahma and his 4 mind-born sons come to Lord Krishna for spiritual instruction. That's the context of Jean Maurice's question. And he says, why would the scripture describe Lord Krishna as more powerful or having more knowledge than Brahmaji? Why is Krishna given this special description in the Uddhava Gita and presented as greater somehow than Brahma? This is one of the features throughout Hindu scripture. You really have to study many scriptures before you come to understand. When you're studying the Bhagavata Purana, Uddhava Gita is a small excerpt from the Bhagavata Purana. In the Bhagavata Purana happens to be a Vaishnava Purana. In every story in the Bhagavata Purana, Lord Vishnu is the highest deity. On the other hand, there are many Shaiva Puranas focused on Lord Shiva. And in all of those Puranas, Lord Shiva is greater than Vishnu and all the others. There are also Shakti Puranas dedicated to Devi, Shakti. Not surprisingly, in those Puranas, Devi is the greatest. And Lord Vishnu, who is that? Lord is kind of the perspective. So this is the common feature of the scriptural literature associated with the Hindu tradition. And the problem I think Jean Maurice is having here is taking these scriptures too literally. These are not, you've heard me say, these are not history books. They're stories. So there was no history. If I ask when did Brahmaji and his 4 sons approach Lord Krishna for instruction, do you think it was on a Wednesday morning or a Tuesday afternoon? My point is, these are ahistorical stories. And we shouldn't superimpose our modern concepts of history on these stories, which is why every Purana tells stories in a different way. Mahabharata tells many, many stories in different ways than all these Puranas. So the story depends on the storyteller and the orientation of the storyteller. So in the Bhagavata Purana, the emphasis is on Lord Vishnu. This is a question from Ritik, who lives in Himachal Pradesh in North India. He says, mind has emotions or feelings, but Atma doesn't. Make sure we understand. He's absolutely correct. How do you know whether you're happy or sad? Consciousness, Atma. Atma is the unchanging consciousness that reveals the constantly changing emotions in your mind. So Atma doesn't have emotions. Atma reveals the emotions as they arise in your mind. So his question, Ritik's question is, how come Atma is described as ananda svarupa, that whose svarupa, whose essence is ananda? How can Atma be described as ananda svarupa since it's beyond feelings? Even though, and here's the key, even though ananda is also a feeling or emotion, and that's where the problem is. So the problem is words have different meanings in different contexts. Have you ever discussed that before? Many times. So if you're eating your favorite sweet, whatever it might be, how about this rasagula? I choose something I like, rasagula. Notice I won't say jalebi. I don't like them. For some reason, I will never use jalebi as a metaphor, but I will use rasagula. These are Indian sweets, obviously. So, if I'm eating this rasagula and I say, Hare Ananda, I'm definitely describing my feeling of enjoying that sweet. But Ritik correctly said, Atma is ananda svarupa. Svarupa means essence. Svarupa means not a feeling. A feeling is not essential. Essence means that which doesn't come and go, that which is fundamental to you. Consciousness is fundamental to you. It doesn't come and go. Feelings do come and go. Emotions come and go. They're not fundamental. They're not svarupa. Meaning that ananda, when used to describe Atma, Sat, Chit, Ananda, that usage of the word ananda is not as a feeling. Rasagula ananda is different from Atma ananda. You need to differentiate. Rasagula ananda is a feeling that comes and goes. Atma ananda is not a feeling that comes and goes. Atma ananda refers to Atma as being limitless, full, complete, perfect, utterly content as it is. This is the essence, the svarupa of Atma. So here we have to differentiate. And it's a problem because ananda is used in vernacular language in a variety of ways, and usually ananda is used in a sense of a feeling. But when we are using it to describe Atma, as in Satchit Ananda, there, in that expression, ananda is not a feeling. Many commentators will explain ananda as anantya, limitlessness, boundlessness, boundarylessness, that sense. Okay. Then, from these questions we're able to go through a little more quickly today. That was good. This is from Jay, who lives in New York. Jay asks, where do thoughts and decisions originate from? I know I am not the body or the contents of my mind because I can observe those. But how can I be sure I am not that which produces the contents of my mind? How can I be sure? I didn't read that carefully before. How do I know that I am not the source of the contents of my mind? So first of all, the first part of the question is easy. Where do thoughts and decisions come from? They come from your mind. That's the easy part. Decisions, by the way, come from your mind, right? When you decided to attend this satsang, whether it means you're in New Jersey and you came here, or you decided to put it online, if you're watching on your phone or tablet or computer, you took a decision to watch this satsang. That decision was taken at some point in time. Did that decision happen? The fact that a decision was taken to attend this satsang, did you know that decision was taken or not? Did you just accidentally find yourself here? Or accidentally find yourself watching me on the computer? Not likely. That decision took place in your mind and you were aware of it. You are the sakshi, the awareful witness of all mental activities, and decision-making just happens to be one of those many, many mental activities. Decision-making. So, thoughts, decisions, emotions, everything arises in your mind. But the tricky part here, I hadn't looked at this before. How can I be sure that I am not the one who produces the contents of the mind? This is a good place where meditation can help. When you achieve a state of absorption in meditation, the individual you, the ego or akhandakara, dissipates. So if you haven't managed this in meditation, you can imagine pretty well. So imagine yourself in meditation and you get so deeply absorbed in your meditation that your sense of being a meditator goes away. You disappear from your own awareness, so to speak. You disappear as an individual person. So in that situation, there is no agent of action. Sorry, I have to use technical terms. I don't know how else to explain this. You, as an agent of action, do not exist in that state of meditative absorption. If you sit in that state of meditative absorption long enough, guess what happens? Thoughts start to bubble up in your mind. Thoughts bubble up in your mind in spite of the fact that you're not making them bubble up in your mind. You are figuratively out of the picture. You are absorbed in samadhi. The mind does it on its own. And Patanjali, in his Yoga Sutras, I would say about a third of the Yoga Sutras, no, that's not that much, a major part of the Yoga Sutras is engaged with this particular issue. And that is, our minds are so mechanical, they keep throwing up all of the stuff on its own. So, the experience in samadhi, when you are completely at rest, demonstrates that you don't produce your thoughts. Because even when you are completely at rest, thoughts continue to bubble up. They're not your thoughts. They're thoughts mechanically produced by your brain. And a little neuroscience can answer that question real easily, right? If you're absorbed in meditation, all your neurons continue to be active. So it's hardly surprising that your mind can create its own thoughts. Okay. Ron seems to have a question. Shall we take your question? And I can tell.
Thanks.
It's fun.
Okay. You said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that that our minds, the limitations of our minds can't see the fullness of Atma. But then how can that vritti you talked about from that other question come about? I mean, how could it be satisfied, so to speak?
Make it more clear, please.
How could our limited minds have that vritti that is unlimited?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So Ron is going, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We're going back to that question about akhandakara vritti, a thought which is capable of removing ignorance about Atma. And you make this is an important question to ask here. I remember asking the same question. It's a good question. And the question is if we admit the fact that our minds are finite and limited, then how can our minds ever reach the limitless? How can a finite mind reach the limitless? Does that more or less express your question? And the answer to that is, thank goodness our minds don't have to reach the limitless. The limitless is an already existent fact, the truth of who you are. There's another part of the question we'll come to in just a moment. But the first part is, your minds don't have to transcend the human condition. In other words, you don't have to be like the ancient rishis. Just to make a contrast, the ancient rishis had no scriptures. In fact, they had no gurus. Actually, they had their fathers. Usually they learned from their fathers. But they certainly didn't have scriptures in those ancient times. So then they had no choice but to somehow transcend the limitations of the human mind. And we attribute to those ancient rishis this ability to transcend these limitations. The technical term in Sanskrit is krantadarshi, those who can see beyond. So the rishis had some capacity that we don't possess, some capacity to go beyond the human limitations of the mind and reach to this higher level. Whatever they discover then comes down to us through the scriptures, which is why we don't need to duplicate what the ancient rishis did, which is a good thing because there are few of us, if any, who could possibly reach to that level. So for us, we use the teachings of the rishis like a roadmap leading us through a process of self-inquiry. And that process doesn't need, again, we don't have to duplicate what the rishis did, transcending the limitations of the mind. They've already done the work for us, so to speak. And what is limitless, let's come back to the first part of the question. How can a limited mind reach the limitless? What is limitless is your essential nature as Satchidananda Atma, an already existent truth of your nature. It's nothing that needs to be reached. It's already here, now, in your ordinary experience. The problem is that the full and complete nature of that consciousness is not properly known. Here we're now to the second part of the question, covered by the veil of ignorance. And here's the final answer to that question. The veil of ignorance is a product of the mind. A veil of ignorance, which is a product of the mind, can be removed by the mind. No problem. Ignorance, whose locus is the mind, can be removed in the mind, by the mind, without transcending the mind. Ignorance is not transcendent, right? Ignorance is a normal mental reality. We all know it very well. We're all experts in ignorance. Except those who would say, not me. So, ignorance is a normal human feature, and that normal human feature of ignorance is overcome through knowledge. But this particular ignorance is a little unusual. It's not like ignorance of the pot is pretty common, ordinary. Ignorance with regard to Atma is uncommon. It's an exceptional form of ignorance. So an ordinary vritti is good enough for pot knowledge, but the an ordinary vritti is good enough for pot knowledge. But to gain knowledge of Atma requires a pretty extraordinary vritti, and that one is called akhandakara vritti. Does that work for you?
Yep.
Okay. Other questions here? Yeah, please.
Namaste, Swamiji. So I have a follow-up about the thought and decision-making process of the mind. So as you said, I've probably gone nowhere close to your level of absorption in meditation, but yeah, this is like this phenomenon I have also observed, that the thoughts just bubble up, right? But on the other hand, we know that we can have intentional thoughts.
Absolutely.
Right? In the same manner, there are many decisions that are made by our mind without our even knowing that, noticing it.
Sure.
But we can also see how the mind suggests different decisions, and we kind of choose one.
All true.
So I also want to ask about the iccha shakti, which is referred to as the shakti of the Ishvara or shakti of the Brahman or Atman, right? This is, as I understand it, is the power to power of expressing the will of making decisions. So how can the inert mind, which is insentient, make decisions unless there is some knower or the knowing power that is kind of having the impetus to make the decision?
Okay. So a question about the nature of iccha shakti. You can call it, in fact, loosely, it's free will. Iccha shakti would be, it's not a direct translation for the word free will, but it refers to your capacity to make decisions. I want it, I'm going to get it. Iccha literally means desire. But if you translate it as a power of desire is a power, it doesn't translate very well in a literal sense. Your translation was just fine. Your understanding of iccha shakti is fine, except who possesses iccha shakti is really the essence of your question. Does Atma possess this free will? Does Atma possess this power of decision making and attribute it to and endow the mind with that power? Or does the mind have this iccha shakti on its own? And here we have to understand a little bit more. This is at the micro level. Let's back up to the macro level. So you correctly said, actually you didn't, I heard you said Atma possesses and Brahman possesses iccha shakti, both of which are technically incorrect. Ishvara possesses iccha shakti. Ishvara is the creator, sustainer, destroyer of the universe. Also Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti. I won't get into these. There are 3 Shaktis, including the power of knowing and the power of acting. These 3 Shaktis, powers, are possessed by Ishvara. Now, Ishvara is one way of understanding Ishvara is as the macrocosm as the whole, and we are related as parts to the whole. So Ishvara possesses complete iccha shakti, limitless free will, whereas we possess, as parts of the whole, we possess limited iccha shakti. But notice in this metaphor between macrocosm and microcosm, we're talking about at the intermediate level of vyavaharika satta, worldly creation. In Advaita Vedanta, Brahman, or Atma, their equivalent, is nirguna. Shakti is a guna. Therefore, nirguna Brahman, or Satchidananda Atma, cannot possess iccha Shakti, Kriya Shakti, Jnana Shakti, any kind of Shakti. These are gunas. So, therefore, we can only conclude that iccha Shakti is a power of the mind. And just as Ishvara can be said to possess limitless iccha Shakti, we can therefore, as a part of Ishvara, we can possess limited iccha Shakti. Do you want to follow up on this, please?
Yes, just a little follow-up. I understand it's very logical, but if the Brahman is everything that exists, right? So all these gunas and Shaktis...
let's just, pardon me for interrupting you.
Sure.
Language issue. Brahman is everything that exists is technically incorrect. Ishvara is everything that exists.
Okay.
Brahman is the non-dual reality because of which everything exists. Boy, we're splitting hairs now. But this distinction is important to answer your question. Go ahead with your question now.
Yes, so somehow my intuition is working in a way that if the Brahman is, the underlying reality, right?
Which is non-dual and nirguna.
Non-dual and nirguna. But somehow my mind is like always trying to say that this underlying reality possesses everything in latent form, even maybe not expressed, but somehow it is already there because something cannot appear out of nothing. Right?
Absolutely. So this is basically what every other not every other, most schools of thought outside of Advaita Vedanta teach exactly that. And that is Brahman, in fact, what you just described is very much like Vishishta Advaita, that Brahman is the source. Brahman is not nirguna. Brahman possesses infinite gunas. This is Vishishta Advaita. So Brahman possessing infinite gunas can then give rise to an infinitely complex universe.
And so cannot these two statements be reconciled if we say that there is the both poles exist for Brahman, the one where he's like all these are completely unmanifested, and the same Brahman manifesting?
Can these two be reconciled? No one's done it yet. So since the time of Shankara, they've been arguing about this, and these are all great scholars. Don't ask me to reconcile it. But historically, it's been tried to reconcile these two positions of Vishishta Advaita and Advaita. Can Brahman be both simultaneous? In fact, there's one school of thought. Can Brahman be simultaneously the source of infinite gunas and simultaneously be nirguna. And that is exactly the doctrine of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu called this Bheda Abheda Vada, that there is simultaneous difference and non-difference. But already, just from the very name, you can get the idea that there are some logical inconsistencies.
Sri Aurobindo is also doing this.
Does he
like,
also do it? Right.
reconciling.
And so it's, I think, a natural human impulse to find some way to attribute to Nirguna Brahman some kind of creative aspect. Vedanta also struggles with this. By the way, this is one of the fact that you have this intuition, as you called it, shows, I won't call it a weak point in Vedanta, in Advaita Vedanta, but a place where Vedanta struggles to explain how, in simple terms, how a world of duality can arise from a non-dual substratum. So Vedanta has a doctrine called Maya, and let me be very clear. The doctrine of Maya cannot be logically proved. Doctrine of Maya cannot be logically disproved. It answers the question about why it exists. I may come to a joke in just a moment. So Maya is an answer to this question, and Advaita Vedanta's solution to the problem you're struggling with is that Maya, which exists only at relative level, at vyavaharika satta, it's not a reality like Brahman. It is not a co-equivalent. It's not a simultaneous reality in addition to Brahman. Maya exists at an empirical level, and it's Maya that trigunatmika Maya. So Maya is the source of gunas. Maya is the source of shakti.
Can I just one more
Please.
time? So sorry for taking
No,
so much time.
no, it's a good train of thought. Please feel free.
To come back to Sri Aurobindo's approach.
Mm-hmm.
So his approach is that the same being has these two poises simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
The static poise, which Advaita Vedanta would call the Nirguna Brahman, but this is the very same reality which has a dynamic aspect to it. And there is a possibility of reconciliation if you go through through what he calls the supramental supermind, not just ordinary mind. It's like completely different level of mind. It's not the like material mind as we know it. So for me, it sounds like a very logical and very like intuitive solution for me. That this very same being having these two aspects to it. It's not two different entities, but two different modes of the same entity. So why is there a problem from the Advaitic standpoint? Where is the problem with that?
I don't know, because I haven't studied Aurobindo thoroughly, but I do know that his teachings never made it into the scholarly mainstream. And this is just an observation, doesn't prove anything, but the great Sanskritic scholars who continue today to teach Advaita Vedanta, you can actually, to hear these guys, first you hear them debate in Sanskrit. It's just mind-boggling. I can't even follow it. It's just the complexity of the subject matter, and they get so excited and they're talking really fast, and it just overwhelms me very quickly. Anyway, there continues today to be this very scholarly thread, as it were, a stream that comes down directly from Shankaracharya, and I don't know why, but they have, as far as I know, never considered the teachings of Aurobindo in a very serious or scholarly manner. I have no idea why, but I'm just making that observation that Aurobindo's teachings never made it into the mainstream. They may be very profound, I don't know. I've only studied very superficially. I think you've studied quite a bit more. So I really can't answer your question. Okay, let's take just a few more questions. And I think we got some we can do a little quickly here. I like this one. This is Ajit, who asks, if someone performs really bad actions and gets reborn as a snake, how does he get out of it? Since you can only collect, I'm paraphrasing now, you can only collect good karma if you're born as a human being. The snake has no way of doing good karma, so the snake is stuck as a snake. Look at this, he says. So does that person remain a snake forever? Like I hope some politicians do. Very nice, Ajit. I liked your comment. We all enjoyed your joke. So, you see where he's coming from. Politicians reborn as snakes. Not surprising to imagine. So the idea is when you take a lower birth, it's a life of suffering in which you exhaust the bad karmas from past lives, but that life eventually comes to an end, and after that life as a snake is over, then whatever comes next is anyone's guess. There's no way to predict from one life to another, although it certainly is reasonable to expect that some politicians will be reborn as snakes. This is a question from Paul, who lives in this country. Paul asks, if the Earth underwent an extinction event, you know there are asteroids floating around in our solar system. One day, one of those asteroids are going, and this is not if, this is when. One day, one of those asteroids, and by the way, when means could be hundreds of millions of years, we don't know. I mean, really long time scale. But it's not if, it is when. One, because it's happened before. Asteroids have hit this planet before and wiped out, you all know, wiped out the dinosaurs. So one day, a meteor, asteroid, will hit this planet and will extinguish whatever is a prevalent life form on this planet, which may not be human beings. We have no idea, but let's presume it's human beings. So if the Earth underwent an extinction event wherein all life, including human, was destroyed, what would happen to the reincarnation cycle, since there would be no new births to allow reincarnation? And here again, we are so limited as human beings in what we could know. How do we know that the only place sentient beings exist is this planet? We have no idea. I'm not saying this is proof for alien life. I'm just saying we have no way of knowing. We certainly can't rule it out that sentient beings, like human beings, exist not only on this planet, but they could most certainly exist elsewhere. Just sneak in a couple of short questions here at the end. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that I was impatient in a prior session. I also, I'll just read his question. This is Mickey. Mickey lives in Australia. Mickey says, recently you mentioned that you were impatient during one of our satsang questions. You said in the same session that an enlightened being is perfectly peaceful and content. Good. Can you please elaborate on how a mind can be impatient when there is perfect peace and contentment? Okay. Perfect peace and contentment describes Atma, not the mind. Minds are minds. A human being, whether they're enlightened or not, will have a human mind. An enlightened being has a human mind. An enlightened person has a human mind that can get tired. And sometimes when minds get tired, they get impatient. That's all it is. It's just normal human behavior. And I'll remind you that this is, I think, one of the, my guru liked these little statements that were very few words, but so filled with meaning. This is my guru's definition of an enlightened person. He said, an enlightened person, those are exact words, an enlightened person is a normal person. The only normal person. What does that mean? You can figure it out. Okay, I think we'll make this the last question. This is from Sunny, who lives in Korea. Very nice. Oh, interesting. It's quite lengthy, so let me paraphrase. Bhagavad Gita describes a kind of sannyasa, mental sannyasa, where you recognize, I am not the doer of action. Actions take place, I don't do anything. In fact, Sri Krishna himself uses that very language. He says, I don't do anything at all, even while I'm walking and talking. Sri Krishna says, I don't do anything at all. So the idea is that here Sri Krishna is speaking from the standpoint of Atma, unchanging consciousness. And it's correct. Unchanging consciousness does nothing. Actions are born of the body, mind, driven by, before enlightenment, driven by desire, raga, dvesha. After enlightenment, driven by karma. Now I don't want to get into a long discussion there. But so Sunny's question here is, but then suppose there's a wicked person, such as Duryodhana, who hears Krishna's teachings that I don't do anything at all, and Duryodhana misuses this understanding of being an non-doer, and he says, I do nothing to justify his wrongdoings, harming others, engaging adharmic actions like murder and war. So let's Duryodhana, let's get a modern metaphor. You may know that Hitler was enamored with certain aspects of Hindu culture. He was. He was. He adopted that swastika. He adopted that Hindu symbol as his main symbol. That's his, because he was so enamored with this. He called it Aryan culture. Aryan is a Sanskrit word. So he had this idea of this Aryan super race and all of this stuff. Anyway, so suppose, I have no idea, but it's within the scope of reason, it's possible, unlikely but possible, that Hitler could have read a translation of the Bhagavad Gita. Think this is just for fun. We don't know. I've never, by the way, I've read a lot about Hitler. I've never read any reference to him reading scriptures or of any kind. But anything is possible. Let's just imagine. Hitler reads the Bhagavad Gita, and then when later during the war, by the way, you know that especially towards the end of the war, his own generals thought this guy was crazy. Early on, they supported him a lot. But as time went along, it became more and more apparent that this guy was really, really imbalanced and off. Suppose Hitler were to justify to his generals. He says, you know what? I'm not doing anything at all. This is all karma. I am merely an instrument. So in other words, suppose Hitler were to use his teachings of karma yoga to deny culpability for his actions, and further to attribute the war to cosmic unfoldment unfoldment of karma, referring to the inevitability. No doubt such a thing never really happened, but we can imagine. Could Hitler use the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita as a cop-out, to use the modern American term? And the answer is absolutely no, because to be a non-agent of action requires discovery of your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. It's not something you believe. To believe that you are not an agent of action is a belief. Like a belief in, I told you before, raised in this country, I used to believe in Santa Claus. I did, when that big. So beliefs are beliefs. Whether it's a belief in Santa Claus, or if it's a belief in Lord Vishnu at the bottom of the Milky Ocean, or if it's a belief in Lord Krishna on top of Mount Kailasa, they're all beliefs. So my point is, beliefs don't carry much weight, at least according to Advaita Vedanta. Maybe helpful in some ways, maybe unhelpful in other ways, depending on what you believe in. But beliefs are not the focal point of these teachings of Advaita Vedanta. Now you say, suppose you understand, suppose it's not, oh, I believe I am not an agent of action. I know Sri Krishna says that Atma is unchanging consciousness, and unchanging consciousness can't do anything. Okay, unchanging consciousness can't do anything, but you can. If you're not enlightened, you don't know that you are unchanging consciousness. For you, as an unenlightened person, unchanging consciousness, which is not an agent of action, is a mere idea or concept. It's not a personal reality until and unless you're enlightened. So, without doubt, Hitler was not enlightened. I think that we can safely say. So, and anyone in that kind of situation, you cannot use these teachings by cherry-picking ideas out of the Bhagavad Gita or any scriptures and twisting them around to justify your actions. So Sri Krishna was describing the nature of an enlightened person. An enlightened person is one who truly says, I don't do anything. And in a very real, I don't, and things happen through me is the experience of an enlightened person. That is, karma is unfolding, but without the drive of raga and dvesha. So it's a very natural unfoldment of life, not driven by raga, dvesha. Hitler was most obviously driven by raga, dvesha, and probably by a lot of drugs. Probably. Anyway, I think that's enough on. We don't need to talk about Hitler anymore. And this is probably a good place to conclude our satsang. I'm glad you could all join us. We'll conclude with our prayers. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschad dukkha bhag bhavet asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om Tat Sat. See you next time.